It was Monday and the start of a new pay period at the General Motors assembly plant. Most of our area was waiting for the signal that would signal the start of the assembly line. Our quality control area was one man short, and it was beginning to look like we would have to divert helpers or double our staff to cover the shortfall. Just as the alarm sounded, running footsteps were heard behind the racks of parts surrounding our station. "Wait, guys, I'm here!" shouted a voice, and from around the corner appeared Trevor Martin with a wide grin on his swarthy face. "What's that you're shivering about, Trev? In the night again? Has it really been 3 months already?" teased I. He laughed. "Hey, Ken. Yeah, it's time for a change of scenery again. It helps get rid of the monotony and allows me to check out different ladies." Trev grabbed a couple of torque wrenches and a clipboard and jumped over the moving line to take his seat. Trevor and I had been friends since we both came to work at the plant 3 years ago. We both got out of the Army a few months after each other. And our overseas assignments in Germany coincided for about a year. Ironically, we served within 50 miles of each other but never met. I was a sergeant in an engineer sapper unit stationed in Schweinfurt, and he was a Spec 5-tracked vehicle mechanic stationed in Würzburg. We visited the same towns, restaurants, and nightclubs. We both spent many miserable training periods in Grafenwehr and Hohenfels, suffering from cold and snow in winter, heat and mosquitoes in summer. In addition, we both married before our military service. My wife accompanied me to Germany, but Trev's wife did not. I met my wife Donna at the local community college. She was a year older than me and was completing a 2-year medical technician training program. We started dating and fell in love with each other within a couple months. I got the low number in the selective service lottery, and when it became clear I was going to be drafted into the Army, we decided to get married. And somehow Donna ended up pregnant before I even left for basic training. You know when they say the pill works 99% of the time? Well, we were in the unlucky 1%. I still managed to get home in time for the birth of our daughter, Samantha. And as soon as Sam was 3 months old, Donna and Sam came to Germany to live with me. Trev's wife, on the other hand, decided to stay in the States to save money. In the middle of his 18-month tour, he did make it home on a 30-day vacation. But when he returned home after being laid off, he discovered that his wife was 6 months pregnant and all the money he had sent her was gone. He later learned that since he had gone to Germany, she had been having intercourse with one of his best friends. Apparently, saving money wasn't the only incentive for her not to go with him. Needless to say, the divorce was bitter and not in his favor. Trevor was very popular with the ladies, but if there was even a hint that a woman was married, living apart, or even divorced due to infidelity, he wanted nothing to do with her. And if you asked him if he had ever thought about getting married again, he would simply reply, he had, and I have the bite marks on my ass to prove it." He didn't really trust women and wasn't shy about letting them know it. His relationships tended to burn out quickly. Trev and I would get together for a few beers after work about once a week when we both worked second shift. When we worked different shifts, we got together a couple times a month at the local American Legion. We mostly talked about our military service and life in Germany, our progress in school, and occasionally work issues. Sometimes I would brag about my wife and daughter, and Trev would brag about all the women he had dated. A couple years ago, Trevor also became an assistant union steward at our plant. He laughed about it and said it was mostly to meet all the women working in final assembly. Although we had a lot in common, we rarely socialized outside of work or the Legion. Trev was busy getting an associate's degree at the local community college to qualify for the skilled trades program, and I was working on my bachelor's degree in civil engineering at Michigan State University. When I returned to school after being discharged from the Army, I decided to pursue a civil engineering degree because of my military experience. Many of the engineering officers had civil engineering degrees, and I spent most of my work helping them. I admired their skills and abilities and thought it would be a great career. However, the reality of supporting a family while simultaneously attending full-time school quickly set in. Educational benefits from the VA and a part-time job were not enough. I eventually decided to study part-time and work nights at the auto plant. Donna stayed home with Sam until he was 2, and then went to work part-time at the hospital as a cardiologist, usually working 3 or 4 days a week. Although we weren't rich, once we were both working, money became a non-issue. Finally, I had almost reached my goal of getting my degree. We planned that once I graduated and got a job in my field of study, Donna would quit her job, get pregnant, and we would give Samantha a baby sister or brother, and that would complete our family. We dreamed of buying or building a house in the country on a few acres of land and giving up rent forever. Donna was a typical Nordic blonde. Her family was originally from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where many of the original settlers were from Scandinavia. Her maternal grandparents had migrated from Sweden before World War II, and on her father's side, she had Finnish roots. Donna was tall, only a few inches shorter than my 6 feet 2 inches, slender and athletic. When we met, she suffered from insecurity, mostly because as a child, she was tall and puny for her age and intimidated boys. She claimed she had only had 2 dates before college, but after high school she had gotten fatter, gained grace, style, and looks. When I met her, she was a real catch. Saying that someone is the love of your life is a cliché, but it doesn't make it any less true. No one I dated came even close to the feelings we had for each other. Teaching each other what love is when we served in Germany brought us even closer together. Samantha's birth came as a surprise to both of us, but it was the best gift we had ever received. Sam had Donna's blonde hair and eyes, my nose and chin. We both adored her. Donna was a good mother, and we both looked forward to adding another child to our family. It's true that most men talk about sons, but secretly, I favored another daughter. I just loved hearing my little girl laugh and listening to her talk. She was just adorable, and not spoiling her was a real challenge. In the evening, Trev and I talked as we slowly walked past the conveyor belt. When lunchtime approached, he asked me what I was doing for lunch. I told him I had packed bags and would be eating on the table outside the employee locker room. He said he would join me and we could catch up on the latest news. Once seated at the table, we started talking about school. Trev had earned his associate's degree the previous semester and was excited that he had finally been accepted into the skilled trades program. He expected his notice to start his apprenticeship in the machine repair program to arrive any day now. I was equally excited about the news I received in the mail from the university before coming to work today. My last elective was canceled because of my military experience. I had passed 2 final exams today and took my last final exam on Tuesday, and all my requirements for graduation had been met. We both congratulated each other. Trev asked if Donna was as excited as I was. I replied that I hadn't told her yet, since she was at work when the letter arrived. I thought maybe I should wait until I knew I had passed my last exam and surprise her then. I told Trev that I had my resume and a list of all the architecture and engineering firms in the state and all the county road commissions ready to start sending them out. As is usually the case in conversations between guys, the topic turned to women. The last girl I knew Trev was dating had already left. They had broken up a couple months ago. Now he was dating a woman named Vicky who worked the first shift at the paint shop. He didn't know how long that would last, since he had switched to second shift, but he didn't seem to care too much. We talked a little bit about the other women who worked in the plant in different departments. Who was having affairs with whom, who was getting married, and who was getting divorced. After a while, Trev said carelessly, "Say, Ken, do you still have a picture of your wife hanging in your locker? I saw a woman a couple weeks ago who I swear looked exactly like that picture." I replied, "Sure, but the last picture you saw was at least a year old. I have some new ones now. Where do you think you saw her?" Trev hesitated for a moment, then said, "I don't remember, but I will. Do you mind if I look at your new pictures?" Like a lot of guys, I've always been proud to show off my family. There were several pictures hanging on my locker door. Right after New Year's Eve, we had new pictures taken for our church catalog. The company that made them took different poses and groupings, and you would pick a free photo you wanted to put in the catalog, and then they would sell you all the others you wanted. I had one of the 3 of us, one with Donna and Sam, one with Donna, and a few with Sam. Samantha had just turned 4 years old when these pictures were taken. Donna was wearing a burgundy v-neck sweater, her long blonde hair hanging loosely to her shoulders. The sweater looked great on her, and although you couldn't tell it from the photos, Donna had great legs. Samantha was almost an exact replica of her mother, with her blonde hair and pale complexion, and they had almost identical smiles on their faces. I looked pretty good myself, dressed in a dark sports jacket and an open collar shirt. My short dark brown hair and swarthy complexion made a definite contrast to Donna and Sam. Trev was admiring the pictures and making approving remarks about both of my girls. He seemed to study Donna's picture for several minutes and finally decided on something. Ken, do you mind if I take this picture of Donna? I want to show it to Vicky to see if she thinks it's the same woman I think we saw a couple weeks ago. I guess so, but I don't see what the mystery is, Trev. You can't even remember where you saw her, I said. I know, but Vicky can remember. I'll get her tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. About that time, the buzzer sounded signaling the end of the lunch break. We hurried back to our seats on the line, and I completely forgot about the picture. The next morning, I spent about 3 hours preparing for my last final exam and went to the university to get it over with. After that, I felt really good about myself. I was confident that I had done well and was looking forward to the results, which were due by the end of the week. I looked at my watch and saw that it was still early. I had a couple hours before I had to pick up Sam from daycare. Today was Donna's day off, and I thought it was a great time to unwind a little before going to work. For the past couple months, we have been short on mattresses. The assembly line worked overtime 3 to 4 days a week and usually 6 to 8 hours, 3 out of 4 Saturdays. The money was good, but it stressed us out. Plus, I was taking 3 classes this semester, which created a huge teaching load. Since she worked during the day and I worked at night, we only crossed paths for an hour during the week, which gave us no quality time. I know she resented my lack of attention, but every time we talked about it, she told me that she understood that we were doing this for our future and that it was almost over. It's true that for the past 5 or 6 weeks, Donna had been out of sorts. On weekends, she was testy, lethargic, and unresponsive to any of my suggestions, romantic or otherwise. As the week progressed, her condition would improve, and by Thursday or Friday, she would be her old self. This didn't do us much good, as it was the weekend that gave us the time and opportunity to recuperate and bond with each other. After a couple weeks, I finally brought it up with her, and she only frowned and said she guessed that our schedules had finally gotten to her, and she would get over it, but so far that hadn't happened. I decided to let it go and not push her until the semester was over. I walked through the door and called out, "Hello! I'm in the kitchen!" yelled Donna. I rounded the corner and Donna was standing at the sink making dinner. On the 1 or 2 days that she was free during the week, we tried to have dinner together before I had to go to work. We hoped that this routine would continue when I finally left the plant and worked the regular day shift. I approached her from behind. She twisted around and, without turning away from the sink, asked sternly, "What do you think you're doing?" "It's my last graduation. I don't have to study anymore, and I want to celebrate a little with my wife." "Is there anything wrong with that?" said I softly. She snorted. "I don't know what there is to celebrate. You've got another semester ahead of you, and you still have to work second shift, and I'm home alone with Sam almost every night. I'm not feeling amorous, so keep your hands to yourself." I stopped, stepped back, and looked at her. "Donna, what is this attitude you've been getting the last month or two? What's gotten into you?" Without turning around, she replied, "Not a damn thing." "Donna, turn around and look at me," I said, and took her hand and turned her to face me. She turned around and said, "What?" Her eyes looked into mine and then slid to the side. For the first time, I felt uneasy. This wasn't like her. "I know it's been hard, Donna, but we're nearing the end. I miss you and Sam terribly during the week, but it will be worth it in the end. Just hang in there. Please," begged I pleaded. Donna just stared out the window with an inexpressive face. Finally, she muttered, Sure, sure, Ken. I'm going to go pick up Sam from daycare. Will you finish that? Without waiting for an answer, she wiped her hands on a towel and left. I leaned on the counter and shook my head in bewilderment. What the hell? This was so out of character for Donna that I was completely stunned. I considered telling her I'd graduated high school to see if that would improve her mood, but then decided, screw it. Better to wait for her to get out of this on her own, whatever it was. After dinner, I had a chance to play with Sam for a while. When I finally got ready to leave for work, Donna was sitting in the living room reading the paper. When I walked in to kiss her goodbye, Donna put the paper aside and said, Ken, I want to apologize for being such a bitch earlier. I don't know why, but I've been on edge lately. Will you forgive me? I sat down next to her and took her hand in mine. Donna, do you know that we haven't made love in at least 2 weeks? We've never made love for that long unless one of us was sick. I feel like I'm losing touch with you, and I don't like it. Donna looked at her hands and said, I know, Ken. We'll be better when this is over, I promise. Once again, her inability to look me in the eye bothered me, but I took her apology as a good sign and kissed her goodbye. The job went without incident. Trev and I hardly spoke, and he left on union business during his lunch break. I got home at my usual time. I was so exhausted from the previous day, taking my last exam, thinking about the confrontation with Donna, and working a full shift, that I went straight to bed. Usually, I would stay up for a while and read or watch TV to relax. But here, Donna and I did get into it. I must have fallen asleep again. The next thing I remember was the alarm clock ringing. Since I was out of class, it was my turn to get Sam up and ready for school. She and I ate breakfast together, and then we cuddled and watched cartoons for a while, after which I finally got her dressed and ran to school. It was nice to finally have a whole day to myself before I had to go to work. I pulled out my resume, made one entry on it, finally updating my graduation date, and retyped it. I was so confident that I had passed the exam that I decided to run into Kinko's and make 100 copies of my resume and cover letter. I sat down at the kitchen table and began stuffing and mailing envelopes to engineering firms that interested me. Donna and I conferred, and since both of our parents lived nearby, we decided to try to stay in the state, which still left over 100 possibilities. As soon as my degree was verified, I would mail my applications. As I worked, my thoughts were occupied with the recent changes in Donna's behavior. I guess last night's fight must have been the trigger. But we'd had fights before, some worse than this, and I'd never gotten this kind of reaction. I was completely at a loss trying to explain it. Finally, I finished and put the box of envelopes under the bed. I was still hoping to surprise Donna with the news that school was over as soon as I confirmed the successful completion of my exams. Later that evening, the three of us had dinner before I left for work. Donna was in a playful mood for the first time in a long time and teased me about being tired from our morning classes. Sam chatted about what her friends were doing at daycare. Just sitting here, the three of us together, gave me a warm feeling. I looked forward to doing this every day. And I got to work a few minutes early and started the usual prep work. Trev came over to us and we chatted for a few minutes. He seemed to be in a somber mood, and I joked to him about having to burn the candle at both ends. He just smiled and asked if I had any plans for after work. He thought we could get together and have a beer. I thought that was a good idea, and we headed to our posts as the line started up. The line ran nonstop for 8 hours that night, so we got to Gino's Bar and Grill around 11:45. Gino's locked the doors at 2 in the morning, but if you were one of his regulars, he'd let you stay until 4. We always tipped the bartenders well for the privilege. We took a free table and grabbed a couple beers each. It was a drinker's bar, so there was a jukebox playing quietly in the corner, and the hum of conversation echoing through the room. Trev reached into his pocket, pulled out the picture of Donna I'd given him, and held it out to me across the table. With a strained expression on his face, Trev said to me, "Ken, I need to talk to you about this." I laughed and said, "That's okay, Trev. I don't mind you keeping her for a couple days. A serious Trev said, No, Ken. What I meant was that I wasn't being truthful about where I thought I saw Donna, but I wanted to show her picture to Vicky to make sure I wasn't wrong. Okay, so what's the deal? Trev cleared his throat, took a sip of beer, and set the bottle aside. Last Friday night, Vicky and I went clubbing with Tony Williams and his girlfriend Vanessa. You remember Tony, don't you? Yeah, sure. You guys went to high school together. He worked here in final assembly and then transferred to the third plant a year ago. That's him. Anyway, we saw Donna that night at the club. I thought about that for a moment, wondering why Trev thought it was important. Donna had a habit of going out once a week with a couple girls from her department. I never judged her for wanting to go out every once in a while, after all. I'd been working second shift for over 3 years now. They usually went out to dinner, and sometimes I knew they'd stop by a nightclub for a couple drinks. Donna hired a babysitter for Sam, but she was always home and asleep before I got home from work. Okay, I know Donna sometimes goes out with her girlfriends during the week. What's the big deal? Trev hesitated for a moment and then said, Ken, it was at Black and Tan. I felt my face turn red and my stomach rumble as it dawned on me what he was talking about. The Black and Tan nightclub was on the dark side of town, along the riverfront. The police were called in at least once a week to clear up disturbances. The city council tried several times to revoke the liquor license because of all the trouble, but the nightclub's lawyers managed to fend them off. Even despite such notoriety, Black and Tan remained one of the most popular nightclubs between Detroit and Grand Rapids for many years. As what Trev had just said ran through my head, I shook my head from side to side. No, Trev, you must be wrong. There's no way Donna would go there. Trev looked at me sympathetically. Ken, you couldn't mistake Donna in that crowd. Besides, I showed her picture to Tony this morning. He recognized her too. She was there with another white chick, long brown hair, skinny. My head was spinning. She couldn't have been there. But I knew Trevor wouldn't lie to me. He'd never lied before, and he had no reason to lie now. There had to be some explanation for this. I tried to focus on what Trev was saying about the other woman. Long hair, brown, thin, you say? Yeah, almost as tall as Donna, but thin. Very thin. I started cussing. Damn it, damn it, damn it! That bitch, that worthless goddamn bitch! Who? Connie Johnson Felgenhauer Wilkerson, that bitch. I suppose you know her? Yeah, I know her, I said bitterly. A couple years ago, before we moved into the house we're renting now, we lived in a townhouse on the south side of town. Trev nodded. Sure, I remember. Our neighbor was Connie Johnson Felgenhauer Wilkerson. She and her 2 kids. She's about our age, but she's been married and divorced twice before. So I started calling her by all 3 last names. She has 1 child from each marriage. Cute kids, not that she had much interest in them. Almost every weekend she gave them up to her ex-husbands to raise. We were pretty friendly with her until we really got to know her. For a while, Donna watched the kids a couple days a week. Connie worked as a cashier at Old State Bank, from what I've heard. But I think most of her income came from child support from both exes. She had a tendency to sometimes leave for a party after work and forget to come home. A couple times the kids stayed overnight at our house because she didn't show up until the morning. When she finally did show up, she looked like she had been ridden a lot and laid down wet. After the second time this happened, I told Donna I wasn't going to do it anymore. Connie would have to find someone else to watch the kids. Sounds like a piece of work. Is that why you're still mad at her? I shook my head. I had a friend named John Preston. We went to the same high school, but he was a year older than me. He was working nights assembling axles when I came to work at the plant. He and his wife Tracy had a little girl the same age as Sam. The 4 of us would get together with the kids from time to time. After the baby was born, Tracy sort of let herself go and became fat and unkempt. No medical reason we found, just too much fast food and not enough exercise. John and her fought about it all the time. One day, John came over to our house while Connie was visiting. I introduced them. A week later, I was coming home from work around 2 a.m., and John's pickup truck was parked in front of her house. Another week went by, and John left his wife Tracy and moved in with Connie. He told me he was in love with her and wanted to marry her. I thought he was crazy and told him so. Not a month later, John left work early one day, came home and found Connie in bed with another man. They had a big fight, and Connie kicked John out. His wife, of course, filed for divorce and broke it off in court. John only sees his little girl 2 weekends a month and can barely afford a studio apartment to live in. Neither John nor Tracy has spoken to us since the divorce was finalized. Damn, that's pretty nasty, Ken. Yeah, shortly after it happened, we moved into the house we rent now. I never spoke to Connie again. So how did she get back into the picture? I said angrily. About 5 or 6 months ago, I came home from work on a Friday night at my usual time. I found Donna curled up in the toilet. She was vomiting all over the place. She smelled like cheap whiskey and an ashtray. For all I knew, she was supposed to go out to dinner with her girlfriends from work. I cleaned her up and put her back to bed. She was practically passed out. The next morning, I drove Samantha to my parents' house and then came home and waited until she staggered into the kitchen. I pounced on her with both feet. She was too hungover to fight me. Turns out Connie had called her at work several times, trying to talk her into going out. Said she wanted to reconnect and catch up. Donna finally decided that spending time with her wouldn't hurt and asked Connie to pick her up from home that evening. According to Donna, they went to a couple bars, and Connie introduced her to some friends who started buying them drinks. Donna had never been much of a drinker, usually making do with wine, and didn't tolerate alcohol very well. According to Donna, she thinks she remembers smoking a joint in Connie's car at some point in the evening. The last thing she remembers is Connie helping her into the house and paying the babysitter. I shook my head. I was so mad. I yelled at her for the first time in our marriage. I told her offhandedly that Connie was a bitch, a slut, and just a nuisance. I wanted us to have nothing to do with her in the future, and if she had a problem with that, we would definitely end up in marriage counseling. It was the worst fight of our lives. She was crying when I was done and said she wished she had gone out with her and that it would never happen again. I sank down in my chair and stared at my beer. We haven't talked about Connie since, but it looks like it happened again, and she kept it from me. And then it hit me what I just said. By not telling me, she had essentially lied. As soon as I thought about it, a dark cloud came over me. Donna had never lied to me before, or kept anything from me, at least as far as I knew. I believed we had everything in common. After that incident, she always made sure to tell me who she was dating. I never gave it a second thought since I always trusted her. Last Friday was no exception. She told me she was meeting her friends from work for dinner. I looked up at Trev. He looked at me with sympathy, like he understood what had happened to me the first time. And there was something else in his expression that instilled fear in my heart. That's not all, is it? Trev nodded and muttered something under his breath about damn women. He hesitated for another minute and finally said, Tony's one of the regulars at the Black and Tan. He's probably there almost every weekend and knows almost everyone who goes in there. He said Donna and this Connie guy have been there at least the last 3 or 4 Friday nights that he knows of. I just stared at him in bewilderment. Hell no. That can't be true. Trev sipped his beer and said, It gets worse, Ken. I clasped my hands over my ears and stared at the table. My thoughts were running in circles. Did I want to know more? I sat up and looked Trev in the eye. Tell me. They made a couple friends. I asked wistfully. Male friends? Yeah, and they're bad dudes. Both of them are in their early 20s. One of them is named Curtis Halleck. He works for United Parcel Service at the sorting station, doing obscure stuff. But he's also a small-time drug dealer. He's been arrested twice for drug possession and once for assault and battery. He is known to carry a knife with him most of the time. He has been married and is in the process of divorce. The other guy is James Martin. He's a correctional officer at a medium security prison in Ionia. Off duty, he routinely carries a gun, and legally. He's been divorced twice and pays child support for 3 kids from his second wife. Alimony for 3 children greatly reduces his paycheck. His first ex-wife is Tony's sister. There are rumors that he sneaks drugs into prison and sells them to inmates. Supposedly, Curtis is his supplier. He and Curtis went to school together. I was speechless. I couldn't answer anything. "I'm sorry, Ken," said Trav. "I know this is really hard to take." "What else?" whispered I. Trev looked unhappy. Curtis was bragging about how much fun they're having with these 2 white chicks, and James apparently dated this Connie girl before. He says they used to slip out to the car sometimes in the evening and do it. Do you believe them? I believe Tony, and James is his ex-brother-in-law, and he had fun with both of them years ago. Tony doesn't think too highly of James since he found out he beat up his sister when he was married to her, but he still maintains a relationship with them. Maybe Curtis is spreading some bullshit, it's hard to say. But you think there's something to it? Trev looked me in the eye. Ken, they were acting very friendly Friday night when we saw them at the club. I'm sorry. Suddenly, tears came to my eyes, and I got up and went to the bathroom. I sat down in the stall, covered my face with my hands, and really cried. After a while, I got up, washed my face in the sink, and stared at myself in the mirror. My face was pale and my eyes were bloodshot. Other than that, you couldn't tell from the rest of me that I was a person whose life as he knew it was falling apart. I slowly walked over to the table and sat down. I looked at Trev, and after a moment I said, I have to know for sure. I have to see everything with my own eyes. Trev stared at me in shock. That's not a good idea, Ken. You know what kind of shit can happen out there. It doesn't matter. I have to know. I have to know. Are you going to help me or not? Trev just shook his head. Shit, Ken. You know how I feel about women who cheat on their husbands. For several minutes we sat in silence, both of us immersed in thought. Finally, Trev said, Okay, Ken, but you have to promise me to do exactly what I tell you to do. Can you do that? I nodded. Yes, it's your world. I can honor that. Okay, let me think about it and we'll talk tomorrow at work. As we walked out the door, Trev patted me on the shoulder. Stay calm, Ken. I know it's hard, but you can't let her see how you feel. I just nodded and headed home. Later, I sat in the darkness of the living room for a while and just thought. Eventually, I got up and wandered around the house. I walked into Sam's room and looked at her, curled up with a plush dog tucked under her chin. I kissed her cheek and stroked her hair, saddened by the change I suspected was about to happen. I made my way to our bedroom and looked at the sleeping Donna. Her blonde hair, spread across the pillow, glistened in the light from the doorway. I looked at that face I knew so well and wondered how she could have done what I suspected her of. I felt my love change, turning into something cold and bitter, wanting to scream at her and beat her to a pulp. I grabbed a pillow from the bed and slowly closed the door. I collapsed onto the couch, covered myself with a blanket, and stared into the darkness. The next moment, I realized someone was shaking me. Donna said, Wake up, Ken! What are you doing here? I mumbled something in response. She said impatiently, I have to get ready for work. Go to bed and don't forget to take Sam to daycare. I stumbled back to the bedroom, slid under the covers, and fell asleep instantly. Later, as I got up on my alarm clock, I pondered the days ahead, trying to suppress the feelings that threatened to turn into rage. I decided I needed to spend some time with Sam. I picked her up and we had breakfast. I asked her if she wanted to stay home with me today and maybe go to the zoo. She got excited and started telling me about all the animals. I gave her a hug and said, Then that's exactly what we're going to do today. She asked, Is Mommy coming too? I replied, No, honey, Mommy has to work today. She got sad for a minute and said, Well, we can tell Mommy all about it when she gets home, right? I laughed and replied, "Yes, honey, you can tell Mommy about everything when she gets home." We spent a wonderful day together. It was a beautiful, sunny spring day, and we walked around the zoo holding hands and watching all the animals. When she got tired, I carried her on my shoulders, and she giggled the whole time. Afterwards, I took her to McDonald's for her favorite food. By the time we got home, Sam was exhausted and fell asleep on the couch watching her cartoons. I busied myself with making dinner, trying to take my mind off of everything that had happened the night before. By the time Donna walked in the door, dinner was ready and Sam was awake. She jumped into Donna's arms as she came in and said, "Guess what, Mommy? Daddy took me to the zoo today, and we had McDonald's and everything." Donna looked at me, then at Sam and said, "Wow, honey, that's great. That sounds like fun. I wish I could go." As we sat down at the table to eat, Donna said to me as if by the way, "You could wait until the weekend and then we could all go together." I looked at her calmly. "Donna, if you remember, the last few weekends you wanted to do nothing but sleep, watch TV, and not worry about anything." Donna's face went pale, then red. She turned away from me and didn't say anything back. She turned to Sam to listen to him talk about the funny things the monkeys were doing. I thought to myself, to think what a bitch. A little while later, as we were finishing dinner, I decided to give her a little tug on her chain. I said, "I haven't heard you talk much about Josie or Mary from work. What have they been up to lately?" Donna looked at me with the corner of her eye. I'm sure she was wondering why I was asking this now, since I'd never asked before. Nonchalantly, she replied, "They're doing about the same thing. In fact, we're planning to have dinner together tomorrow night." "And where do you plan to have dinner?" "We haven't decided yet. Why do you want to know that?" "No reason. Just wondering what places you went to." Donna listed the names of about half a dozen restaurants around town, mostly modestly priced places with a bar but no entertainment. "Looks like you girls have had your time here. Well, I've got to get to work." I got up from the table and kissed her and Sam goodbye. As I left, Donna was still looking at me suspiciously. I waited for the line to start, and Trev, as usual, rushed in at the last minute and got the usual whipping from the rest of the section. As he walked by, he said we'd talk at lunch. I just nodded, and we started our shift. After eating, we were standing outside the building with the smokers when Trev said, "I still don't think that's a good idea, Ken." I stubbornly replied, "I need to know for sure. If it's true, some heavy shit is probably going to happen. There can't be any mistake." "Sounds like you've given this a lot of thought." I nodded soberly and looked at him. "If it's true, it's something I can't live with." He sighed. "Okay, here's what I want you to do. Tomorrow, call and meet me in the parking lot at Gino's at 8. I'll drive us to Black and Tan in my car, and no bar drinks while you're waiting. I need you sober, understand?" "Got it." He looked at me. "Good thing your complexion is darker than your wife's. Don't shave tomorrow. The stubble will darken your face even more. Do you have dark clothes? I don't want you to stand out, the darker the better. And wear dark glasses. I don't care if it's nighttime. Half the bandits wear sunglasses anyway." I nodded again. "Do you have a dark Panama or a fedora? Something with a visor?" I shook my head. "No." "Okay, I'll get you something. Tony will meet us there. He'll grease the bouncer before we get there. He and I will keep you in a sandwich as long as we can." Jesus. Sounds like a James Bond operation. Trev looked at me seriously. "Bad shit happens there every week. I don't want it to happen to you. Not least because if something happens to draw attention to us, she'll probably see you and you'll never know the truth. We'll go inside, keep our heads down, see what's there, and then we'll leave. Okay?" "Okay, Trev. And thanks, I really appreciate it." "Damn it, Ken, you know my ex-wife screwed me over big time. I wouldn't want that to happen to you." The rest of the night went by quickly. I made my way home as usual. As much as I hated to do it, I slept in our bed with Donna. I didn't want her to think I was avoiding her on purpose. I didn't hear her get out of bed, but I remember her saying goodbye as she left for work. A short time later, the alarm clock rang and I got up to start the day. After taking Sam to school, I drove to the university and engineering college. I walked around the professors' offices and checked the exam results posted on their doors. I got a 2.5 GPA and two 3.0s. Normally, I would have been a little disappointed with a 2.5 score, but that was the least of my problems. I went into the admin office and made sure my credits were accepted and my diploma was ready. Back home, I picked up my box of job applications and took them to the post office. Regardless of what else happened, I was moving forward with this part of my life. And I went through my closet and found the clothes I needed for the evening. I put everything in a bag and put it in my pickup truck. Since Donna was going out to dinner, I made something for Sam and me. Donna arrived later than usual and ran in the door and apologized, saying she had been called in to do an emergency EKG on a patient who had just been admitted. I told her I still had time, but I couldn't miss work today. I told her the story that several people had gone on vacation and we would be short-staffed. I kissed them both goodbye and headed for the exit. I decided to stop by the mall and pass the time watching a movie before I had to face Trev. My thoughts were running at a mile a minute, and I didn't even remember what I was watching. I got to Gino's a little before 8, and Trev was already there. I told him I'd change in the men's room and be ready in a couple minutes. He was standing by his car when I got back, and I asked him if I was dressed right. I was wearing a black sports jacket over a black polo shirt and dark jeans. He nodded and handed me a black pork pie hat from the Blues Brothers. "See if it fits." It fit. He just hummed and said, "Let's go." We got to the Black and Tan at 8:45. There were a lot of cars in the unlit parking lot. There were quite a few people, singles and couples, walking toward the club or crowding the entrance. Finally, we found a seat almost at the very back. Trev said, "Wait here while I go check it out." He came back about 15 minutes later. He looked at me and his face tensed. "They're here. Tony is keeping an eye on them. Let's go." I tried to swallow the lump in my throat and nodded. I put on my hat and sunglasses and Trev said, "Cover as much of your face as you can. Try not to look up, okay?" We got in line to go inside. I got strange looks from the other people waiting to get in, but didn't say anything. When we got to the door to pay the entrance fee, the largest of the two bouncers said to Trev, "Who's your friend, bro?" "He's an old army buddy who saved my life in the army." Trev said this with an honest face. "Damn, who are you trying to fool, Trev? You were never in the army." Trev grinned and said, Okay. He's my third cousin on my father's side. He's the black sheep of the family and we're kind of ashamed of him." The bouncer laughed and said, "Come on in. You already know where Tony sits." We walked in and the hall was almost empty. The lights were only on around the band and the bar. The band was playing loud, heavy rhythm, and the smoke was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It smelled like cigarettes, stale sweat, and booze. A large crowd had gathered on the dance floor, swaying to the beat. I followed Trev as he slid to the left side of the room. Every now and then he'd stop, say something to someone, exchange a handshake, and move on. I ignored the stares and mumbled comments, lowered my head and clung to him like a tick. Finally, we got to a table with a couple of empty chairs, at which Tony sat and watched us. We both leaned over and Trev said, "Ken, do you remember Tony?" I nodded and we shook hands. "Thanks for your help, Tony." He just shrugged and pointed his head over his shoulder. "They're over there by the wall. They got here half an hour ago." Trev motioned for me to sit on the side where I could see them from without turning my head. I looked over at their table, covering myself with my hat, and braced myself for what I was about to see. Hell, we were only 25 to 30 feet away from them. Donna and Connie stood out like a lighthouse on a stormy night on the darkest night of the year. The four of them sat in a booth where the women stood against the wall. Donna sat next to a big guy who was no more than 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed about 230. The other guy sitting next to Connie was probably bigger than me in height and size. I whispered to Trev, "Which one is the football player sitting next to Donna?" "That's Curtis." I examined him closely. Well-dressed, shaved-headed, with a mustache and goatee. He chatted easily with everyone and was obviously paired up with Donna. He looked stern, but gave the impression that he was fine. A waitress came over and took our drink orders. I couldn't take my eyes off my wife. She was talking, laughing, and acting like she was as comfortable as if she were in her own home. Curtis had his arm around her shoulders and occasionally said something in her ear. In front of her was a glass of white wine that was almost empty. Connie was leaning against another guy, who I realized was James. Trev and Tony were talking amongst themselves and occasionally throwing comments in my direction. I was so focused on the other table that I didn't remember what they were saying or if I was responding at all. Over the course of the evening, it seemed that men kept coming over to talk to Curtis or James, but it was obvious that they were more interested in Donna and Connie. I just sat there and watched the evening go by. I could barely touch my glass. My stomach was cramping so badly. A couple times, the four of them got up to dance, and as far as I could tell, it was mostly dirty dancing. Curtis wrapped his arms around Donna, and it was obvious she didn't mind. Trev must have seen the look on my face because he leaned over to me and asked, "Are you going to be okay?" I nodded. "If you can't calm down, I have to get you out of here." The atmosphere was heating up, and I tried to imagine that I was just watching strangers make out. I had to look away a couple times. My emotions alternated between rage and overwhelming sadness. I kept getting tears in my eyes as I realized the enormity of what was happening. Finally, James said something to Curtis, and he and Connie got up and walked toward the door. After about an hour, James and Connie returned to the table. Connie's face was flushed, and they both had a satisfied expression on their faces. Curtis pulled his hand out from under the table and said something to them, and they all laughed. Donna sat up and looked around as if she didn't realize where she was. Curtis said something to James and stood up. He held out his hand to Donna and helped her out of the stall. The two of them walked along the edge of the dance floor toward the door. Donna clutched into his arm, and almost every eye in the room followed them. Trev leaned over to Tony and I. "This is where we need to leave from, okay?" I nodded, and the three of us stood up and walked towards the door. I followed Trev and Tony followed me. The fresh air hit me like a hammer when we reached the door. It was just in time because my head was splitting and I was close to losing whatever else was left in my stomach. As we made our way out of the crowd gathered at the door, Trev said to Tony, "Do you know what he drives?" Tony nodded. "Yeah, a Lincoln Town car, 4-door silver. What else would a self-respecting drug dealer drive? He usually parks in the last row in the back parking lot." We walked that way, looking at the cars as we went. Tony said quietly, "There it is," and pointed to the right. We were standing in the shadow of the warehouse about 4 cars away, and we had a very good view. They were sitting in the front seat with the windows down a couple inches. We could see the glow from the jam pass from one to the other. As we watched, I hoped that was all there was so far. Finally, the glow faded, and the two of them seemed not to move. Finally, the front doors opened, and they both stepped out and stood, talking, on the roof of the car. I breathed a sigh of relief that was replaced by a groan of disbelief as they both opened the back doors and climbed in. We watched as their heads connected for a few moments and then separated. Then Donna's head dropped into his lap. A sudden burst of uncontrollable rage swept over me. I began to shake and I took a step forward. Trev and Tony grabbed my arms and Trev hissed at me. "Ken, no, not here and not now." A sudden rush of clarity swept over me and I stopped trying to move. It was over. My marriage was over. The most important thing I had, and what I thought was mine, was gone. The most important thing I thought I loved, I no longer loved. There was only one thing left in my life now, and that was Samantha. For several minutes, we stood motionless. We saw Donna's head come up, and they were together again. Then they disappeared from sight. After a few minutes, Donna's wide legs showed above the seats and began to twitch spasmodically. I shook off Trev and Tony's hands and said without emotion, "Thanks, Trev. Thanks, Tony. I've seen enough. It's time to go." Turning and walking away, I said furiously, "My marriage may be over, but it's not." "No," I whispered to myself. "It's not over yet." Part 2. I reached Trev's car and leaned against it with my arms, my head down, trying to keep my body from shaking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash something. I wanted to be anywhere but here. Trev and Tony walked over to me. Trev said, "Are you going to be okay, Ken?" I turned and stared at them both. All my hopes, all my dreams, not to mention the only woman I've ever loved, is in the back seat of this car. What do you think? I said bitterly. Tony cleared his throat, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Ken, I'm really sorry about what happened. If there's anything I can do?" I looked at him and took a deep breath. "Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it, and maybe that's the way it is. Donna will have to leave within the next hour, so she can get me home in time to get me cleaned up. Do you think those two guys will hang around the bar for a while after they leave?" Tony replied, "I don't doubt it. They often do that if the action is over. They like to show off to those who didn't score. If it doesn't conflict with your loyalty, could you have a chat with them and see what plans they have for my promiscuous wife and her new best friend?" Tony looked at me curiously and said, "Sure, Ken. James has been on my shit list ever since he beat up my sister, and Curtis is an even bigger thug than he is. I don't owe them anything. I'll call Trev tomorrow and let him know if I hear anything." Thanks, Tony. That means a lot to me. We all shook hands, and Trev and I got in the car and drove off. On the way to Gino's house, we hardly said anything. When we pulled up, he said, "Do you want a drink?" "I don't really feel like it. I'm going to head home and watch the house and see how soon they'll be back." "And you're going out with her tonight?" asked Trev. I shook my head. As much as I'd like to just beat the shit out of her and kick her out, it's not that easy. I need to think about Samantha. I have to somehow cut her out of my life without losing Sam. Losing her would be murder for me. "Okay, don't forget we have overtime scheduled tomorrow night." "Yeah, I know. I'll be there. I won't be able to stay home with my wife anyway. If you don't have a date or something, maybe we can meet here at Gino's after work. Maybe I can work something out by then." Trev nodded. "Okay, maybe Tony will have something for me by then too." "Thanks, Trev. I appreciate having someone to talk to who's been through this shit before." I got in my car and drove home. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning when I parked on a dead-end street a few houses down from our house. Donna and Connie were coming home from the other side. If the conveyor belt had been running non-stop for 8 hours and I was coming home straight from work, I would have arrived around 2. As I expected, Donna's car was still parked in the driveway. I already knew that Connie had been in the driver's seat for more than just the car accident my life had turned into. About 15 minutes after I arrived, I saw a car drive down the street and stop in our driveway. I saw Connie and Donna get out of the car and walk up the steps. I was too far away to see how well oriented they were, but they got to the door and went right in. About 10 minutes later, I saw Christy, a second grader who lived on the next street over, get out and head toward her house. I saw Donna and Connie standing and talking on the porch and watching to make sure she made it home. After a few minutes, Donna and Connie hugged and Donna went into the house. Connie got in her car and drove off. I had a little time to kill before I got home, so I decided to follow her to see where she was living now. Surprisingly, Connie still lived in the same complex where we were neighbors. I watched her park and walk into her townhouse. I drove across the parking lot and inspected her car. I wrote down the make, model, and license plate number and drove back home. It was past 2, so I pulled up to the house and walked in like any other evening. Only the nightlight was on in the kitchen, as usual, and everything was quiet. I turned on the TV and watched CNN headline news for a few minutes. Finally, I walked down the dark hallway and listened at the bedroom door. I could hear Donna breathing heavily, as she does when she sleeps. I walked into the master bathroom, closed the door, and turned on the light. There was a faint odor of deodorizer in the air. The shower stall was damp, with a damp towel hanging from the ledge. Donna's hairdryer was on the counter and was still warm. I glanced at the wastebasket next to the toilet. In it lay an empty disposable Massengill syringe box. I shuddered as the meaning of what was said came to me. I walked back into the hallway and thought for a moment. I turned and walked down to the basement to the laundry basket that stood under the trash chute. I rummaged through the dirty clothes, but couldn't find anything she was wearing. I looked around the basement and noticed the washer lid was down. I opened it, and there in the cold water lay the clothes she was wearing earlier. I closed the lid and went back upstairs. Looking in on Sam, I grabbed a pillow and blanket and lay down on the couch. I lay there and stared into the darkness, pondering. Everything was business as usual for her. Going to a party and having fun. Getting home before her husband got home from work. Put clothes in the washing machine and soak them to get rid of the nasty odor. Take a shower, wash your hair, and even blow dry it. And don't forget to spritz to get rid of the last traces and keep you fresh for the whole next day. Then go to bed before he arrives to avoid talking about what you did that evening. This is pretty easy to do with a few glasses of wine and a couple of rides in the back seat of the Lincoln Town car. I swore I would never cry over her or our marriage again. She had killed it, heartlessly, repeatedly, and deliberately. My future no longer included her. I was angry, furious, and one step away from murderous rage. I knew I couldn't go for it. I had to be calm and in control of myself to get through this. I had to think about Samantha. I couldn't let Donna affect her. That was my last thought before I fell asleep. I woke up around 8 when Sam was reaching for my face. Daddy, your face is all scratched up. Why are you sleeping here? I smiled sleepily at her. Good morning, Samantha. Are you ready for breakfast? She looked up at me, cuddling her stuffed puppy, and nodded. Will you eat with me? Sure, sweetie. I got up, Sam ate breakfast, and I turned on some cartoons for her. I went back to the bedroom to use the bathroom. Donna was sound asleep, and I didn't expect her to stay up and awake for several more hours. Now I understood why she had been so out of it for the last 4 or 5 weekends. I showered, shaved, and got dressed. I got Sam dressed and decided to take her to her parents' house. Mom and Dad were retired and were spending the winter in Florida in a trailer park. They had just moved back to Michigan a month ago. They had an apartment in town and a house on a small lake in northern Michigan. They loved spending time with their grandchildren. Every fall, they agonized over leaving their home and children, but they just couldn't take the cold and snow anymore. We stayed with them for a few hours and had lunch. Mom asked where Donna was, and I said she was still asleep when we left. Mom looked at me questioningly, and I just shrugged. Mom, Dad, and Sam had a great time, and I mostly sat around and watched the baseball game on TV. Mom teased me about my inattention and then started talking about when she would have another grandchild. My older brother already had 2 children, and I was getting behind her. We had this conversation on a regular basis for several years. I would try to smile and tell her that she would be the first to know. It depressed me to think that it was unlikely to happen now. It was time for me to leave for work, so Sam and I kissed them both goodbye and headed home. Donna was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and reading the paper when we walked in. Sam ran up and gave her a hug and said, Mommy, we went to Grandma and Mommy's and had lunch with them and everything. And stuff was Sam's favorite way to end a sentence. Donna didn't smile but simply said, How nice, Samantha, and gave me a leering look. You could have told me or left a note. I simply replied, I could have, but I didn't, and went into the bedroom to change for work. She followed me down the hall and belligerently asked, What the hell does that mean? It means it wouldn't matter to you if I did. You wouldn't have wanted to go, and we would have gone anyway. I said calmly, "By the way, do you remember I had to work tonight?" I pulled on my work jeans. "What?" Donna looked confused by the change of subject. "I'm working tonight, remember?" As I walked past her and started calling out for Sam, she came running over and I gave her a big kiss and hug. "Good night, Samantha. Be good for your mommy, okay?" Sam nodded and smiled, and I emphatically ignored Donna. I turned, walked to the door, and looked back at them both. "I'll see you in the morning," and closed the door. The look on Donna's face was a mixture of anger, frustration, and maybe some anxiety. Whenever I left for work, I always made sure to kiss her goodbye. Now that was a thing of the past. As I was getting ready for my shift, Trev walked by and asked, "How'd it go last night?" I just shrugged and replied, "About as well as I expected. I'll tell you about it at dinner." "Good. I have some news from Tony, too." Later, as we sat at the table and ate, I told him about how the evening had gone and what I had learned about how she was working on her cover. I also told him about the changes in Donna's behavior over the past couple of months that I couldn't explain before. Just talking about it made me furious again. Trev looked at me sympathetically. When shit like that happens, you can never believe that the person you thought you loved more than anything in the world could have done what they did to you. He shrugged. Tony called me this afternoon. He hung out with the guys at the bar until just before closing. According to him, he bragged about entertaining those two women. Tony said the conversation went on from there. Anyway, before they left, James set up a date with Connie for the following Friday. Apparently, that's what they did. James makes a date with Connie. Connie convinces Donna to go with her. Donna goes out with Curtis. Connie and Donna both hook up, and maybe Donna doesn't feel guilty because she wasn't the one who initiated it. He shrugged. Who knows? But this time they took it even further. James told Connie they were going to get a room at the Red Roof Inn near the Forest Road exit on US 123. I wanted to see if Donna would go for it. I think Connie just laughed and said no problem. So they planned to meet at Black and Tan at the usual time. And when it gets hot, move the party to the hotel. No matter how they do it, it's Donna's damn fault. Our marriage is over and she ruined it, I stated firmly. Trev thought for a moment. Let me give you some advice, Ken. Listen to someone who has been where you are now. Don't let hate and anger consume you like I let it consume me. I wasted several years being angry and resentful. Because of this, I was never able to maintain any kind of serious relationship with a woman. But I'm starting to get hopeful again. My life is not over, and good things are starting to happen to me. I'm not saying you don't deserve justice, but do what you have to do, for your daughter's sake, for your own peace of mind and a healthy life, and not just for revenge. Then he grinned. But if it leads to a little revenge, that is justice. I thought about his words as we made it to the end of our shift. I knew Trevor was right, and someday I might be able to get over the anger, humiliation, and rage. But right now, it was impossible to put it out of my mind. The perpetrators had to pay for ruining my life. Their actions had to have consequences. As I considered everything I knew about the situation, an idea flashed through my mind. If I could pull this off, I could get justice, and Donna would be gone at least long enough to put some distance between her and Sam and me. Later, as we sat over a beer at Gino's, I began to lay out the crux of the matter to Trev. My problem is how to get Donna out of my life and not lose Samantha. If I divorce her, she gets primary custody and her influence could ruin Sam. I can't let that happen. The only thing I can think of besides killing her is to put her in jail or get her in so much trouble with the law that no judge will grant her custody. Makes sense, but how would you do that? I think the drug connection is key, and we know where all four of them will be next Friday night. Curtis already has a criminal record, so the bust is believable. If I can figure out how to arrest Donna and her friends in a way that draws maximum attention, then Donna won't stand a chance of getting custody when I file for divorce. I started sketching out a plan, asking Trev to help me fill in the blanks and find holes or inconsistencies. The best scenario I could come up with was to organize a raid on Friday night when they would all be at the Red Roof Inn. The Tri-County Drug Task Force had a hotline to gather information. I could use it to get the police involved. In order for the arrest to result in serious felony charges, I needed to plant the drugs in such quantities that it was obvious they were not just for personal use. I had to plant them in any car parked outside the hotel. If Donna and Connie were following past practice, it would be Connie's car. If neither woman drove a car, it had to be Curtis's car. I would then call the hotline and initiate an arrest. The biggest risk to me was not getting caught in the drop-off and somehow not being tainted by the subsequent investigation. And time would be of the essence. So what do you think, Trev? That's pretty ambitious, Ken. Do you really want to go that far? He said slowly. I don't think there's any other way. And I want them to burn, Trev, I said adamantly. Okay, I'll play along. First of all, let's get the evidence. We both know half a dozen connections who work at the plant, but getting the amount you need will be expensive. I nodded. I've got that covered. Since Donna went to work 2 years ago, I've started saving all my overtime into a separate account at another bank. I plan to use them for a down payment on a house or a couple acres of land in the country. I was going to surprise Donna. Looks like I won't need them now. I've got over $8,000 in it. He nodded. Good, then money isn't a problem. But I need help getting evidence. If my wife turns out to be involved in the drug trade and someone finds out what I've been buying, it will certainly cause alarm. I know it's a lot to ask, but can you help me? He thought for a moment. Yes, I know 4 or 5 people I trust to keep their mouths shut. I will need to distribute the procurement among them so that the number is reasonable. I nodded. I think everything else is trivial, except for one thing. I'll need an alibi for Friday night, or at least part of Friday night, so I can drop something off and call the police. It would be ideal if I could work on the assembly line. But if I go on vacation, that would take away my alibi. I know people sneak in from time to time, but hiding my absence from the station would be impossible, and I know the foreman would be sure to notice. Trev was silent for a few moments, then laughed. I've got it. I'll talk to the union steward about scheduling a union meeting for Friday night to discuss work rule changes for the upcoming contract negotiations. The union reps always invite a couple people from the rank and file. I'll ask the foreman to authorize you to be one of the rank and file representatives. He can't say no. He'll just have to get one more person from the other stations. The meeting will start right after the lunch break. You can walk out the gate like you're going out for pizza and not come back. Meetings don't usually end until the end of the shift, and I'm sure I can punch your timesheet without anyone noticing. Sounds like it could work. I'll bring the money to work on Monday. Will that give you enough time to get what I need? Yeah, I think so. Thanks. And could you make sure Tony doesn't start taking shit out on James and Curtis without letting us know what's on our minds? I don't want him getting worked up over this. Trev laughed. I don't think he sees it as a problem, but I'll have a word with him. I also want to see what else he can find out about their Friday night plans. By this time it was almost 1 a.m., so we finished our beers and left the bar. As I drove home, I wondered how I would be able to keep my cool for another week. Knowing how Donna bullied Samantha and me, I was just getting impatient. How could she so blatantly and repeatedly disrespect someone she loved? Did she really think she was impervious? That it wouldn't somehow come out? It cost me a huge effort not to give away that I knew she was screwing with both of us. When I got home, I was surprised to find the lights still on in the house. I found Donna asleep on the couch, the TV was still on, and a couple of scented candles were burning next to an empty wine glass on the coffee table. I picked up her glass, turned off the TV, blew out the candles, and went into the kitchen. On the table, I found an almost empty bottle of wine. I poured it down the sink and went to throw it in the wastebasket. When I did, I found another empty bottle there. Now I had to stop and think about it. I had never known Donna to drink alone, and certainly not in large quantities. When I went to put her glass in the dishwasher, I discovered another dirty glass. I took it out and examined it closely. A smear of lipstick was clearly visible on the rim. I went back to the trash can and pulled out another empty bottle and looked at it. There appeared to be cigarette butts inside. The thought made me even angrier. I'd bet anything that Connie was here to make sure Donna agreed to their date next Friday. I cleaned up the evidence and went to bed. As I lay there, the thought occurred to me that Donna not only liked guys, but seemed to be addicted to alcohol and other things. One night, I woke up and felt Donna sit up in bed. I turned my back to her and without thinking, I fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up before 9. I got up and went to check on Sam. She was lying in bed talking to her stuffed animals and playing some kind of game with them. I left her alone and went to take a shower. After getting cleaned up, I shook Donna a couple times. What? What is it? She said, panting. It's 9:30. We still have time to get ready for church. What? Leave me alone and let me sleep, she said grumpily, and pulled a pillow over her head. Donna, did you have guests last night? I asked. She remained silent. Donna, answer me this. Who was here last night? No one, Ken. Now go away and leave me alone. Bullshit. Why are you lying to me? Donna sat up in bed and yelled at me. Damn you! Leave me alone! Then threw herself under the covers and covered her face. I left the room and went into Sam's bedroom. Hi, Daddy. Can we have breakfast already? She said. Of course we can. And how would you feel about going to Sunday school today? Is it Sunday, Daddy? Yeah, so let's have breakfast, then get dressed and go to church, okay? Sam nodded enthusiastically. Okay. Is Mom going too? I tried to smile at Sam. Mom's tired, Sam. She wants to sleep. Sam thought for a minute. Dad, Mom doesn't go anywhere with us anymore. How come? I looked at her sadly and said, I don't know why, Sam. You can ask her when we get home, okay? Sam nodded and ran to get her favorite cereal. The three of us started attending church a couple times a month after Sam's second birthday. Although none of us were very religious, we realized that Sam needed to be raised in a church environment. We found a Methodist church nearby that we liked, and it became our church, although we couldn't go there more often than we did. And since I worked nights, it minimized our attendance at any other social activities. And Donna didn't seem to want to participate in them without me. But Sam really enjoyed going to Sunday school, Bible study, and playing with his friends. Most of the time, the services were educational and many times just comforting. Today's services seemed to fill my need for comfort. I knew that what I planned to do to those who had wronged me was unchristian. But somehow I felt that in time, I would be forgiven. At least the service calmed me down and seemed to give me the strength to get through the days ahead. When we returned, the house was quiet. I peeked into our bedroom, but the bed was empty, and I could hear the shower running in the bathroom. Sam and I were sitting in the living room, Sam watching TV and me reading the paper, when Donna walked in. I watched her look at me out of the corner of my eye, and then without saying a word, she walked into the kitchen. Sam jumped up and followed her into the kitchen. Mommy, Mommy, I went to Sunday school, and Mrs. Benson read us Bible stories, and we played, and I had cookies and some milk. That's good, honey. Mommy, why didn't you come to church with us? Mommy wasn't feeling well and wanted to sleep, honey. There was a pause for a few moments, and I imagined Sam pondering this. Mommy, why don't you like going out with us anymore? That's enough, Samantha. I told you I don't feel well. Now go watch TV, Donna said sharply. Sam slowly walked back into the living room. She picked up her stuffed puppy, climbed onto the couch, and curled up as close to me as she could. She just stared at the TV and didn't say a word. My heart ached with pity for her. All she wanted was her mother's attention, and Donna was too absorbed in her frolicking to notice. The last vestiges of uncertainty about what I was going to do vanished. We stayed cuddled on the couch while Donna gathered something to eat in the kitchen. Eventually, she came back through the living room, walked down the hall, went into our bedroom, and closed the door. She didn't say another word to either of us. I turned to Sam and said, "Do you want to go for a ride with Daddy?" Sam just nodded and said, "Okay." I changed Sam into play clothes, and we got in the pickup and drove off. I wanted to check out the Red Roof Inn and the surrounding area. It would keep Sam busy, and we'd both be farther away from home. The Forest Road exit was just outside the city limits. If you drove east from the freeway, the Red Roof Inn would be on the left, and the Best Western Motel would be on the right. The road ended at an intersection, on the other side of which were cornfields and a horse farm. Sam was thrilled when she saw the horses with this year's foals frolicking in the fields. I pulled off the road and let Sam get out of the car and stand along the fence to watch. While she laughed and clapped as she watched the horses' antics, I pulled field binoculars out of the glove compartment and surveyed the inn. The parking lot was partially screened from the road by a line of sprawling pine trees. It appeared that I could park at the Best Western, cross the road, and hide behind one of the pines. The hotel was an L-shaped, two-story building where you parked next to your room and walked right in from the outside. Depending on which room they were occupying, I could sneak over to their cars and drop this off and then hide behind one of the trees pretty quickly. There wasn't much going on in town this weekend, so I didn't think the hotel would be crowded. I needed to find a working payphone nearby. From afar, it looked like there was such a phone near the Best Western Motel office. Finally, I got Sam back in the truck and went to check it out. I put some change in it and dialed the directory assistance number to make sure it worked. It did. Sam and I spent another couple hours driving around the village looking at stuff before we finally headed home. Sam was almost asleep, so I carried her into the house. When I walked in the door, I sensed something cooking in the kitchen and heard Donna rustling dishes and silverware. Donna poked her head out from around the corner and looked at us. Without looking me in the eye, she seemed to force a smile and said, "Dinner will be ready in about an hour," and disappeared into the kitchen. Mentally, I just shook my head and wondered if Donna felt as schizophrenic as she was acting. I carried Sam into her room and laid her down. She curled up and closed her eyes. I went back to the living room, turned on the baseball game, and decided to finish reading the paper. If Donna wants to pretend everything is okay, that's fine with me. Donna poked her head out of the kitchen one day and asked, "Where's Sam?" "Taking a nap, probably sleeping through dinner." "Good." Then she went back to her business. I watched the game and read the paper. Donna didn't leave the kitchen except to set the table in the dining room. In the local section, I noticed some crime scene photos. Underneath them was the name of a local photographer, Dennis Thompson. He was something of a celebrity as he was a freelance photographer and sold his images to several local newspapers and magazines. One day, one of his shots made it to the Associated Press. About 6 months before that, our local paper had written a feature about him. Apparently, he had been accepted by several police and fire departments in the area as an official photographer, giving him the opportunity to take pictures where others were usually turned away. Thinking about him gave me an idea. Finally, Donna came out of the kitchen and said, "Dinner's ready. I'm going to go see if Sam is awake." I didn't say anything back. I figured she was trying to make amends for being so brief with her earlier. She disappeared into Sam's room and didn't reappear right away. About 10 minutes later, she returned, carrying Sam in her arms and whispering in her ear. I saw Sam nodding her head and hugging Donna tightly around the neck. Donna sat her down in a chair and said cheerfully, "Dinner is ready." We sat down at the table, and it seemed like all three of us were playing roles. Donna pretended that everything was fine, that she was happy and content. I pretended to buy her act, and Sam pretended her mother didn't hurt her feelings. We talked superficially about work and school. Eventually, I lied to myself. I said I was going to sign up for classes on her day off this week. The thought of being alone with her all day was beyond me. The evening was a typical Sunday night. We played with Sam, watched TV, and read a little. When it was time to go to bed, I pretended to be interested in the movie, and Donna went to bed alone. The next day, I started my preparations for the week. I decided I needed to lay the groundwork for the hotline. I walked over to the payphone outside the 7-Eleven store on the next street over. Covering the mouthpiece with a piece of cheesecloth, I dialed the hotline number. My voice was lower than usual, and when the operator answered, I said I wanted to report a crime and how the hotline worked. She told me to choose a code word or sequence of numbers and that my information would be logged under that code. If there was a reward for the information, the money would be paid to the informant who had that code. He also said that for legal purposes, all calls would be recorded. I said, a purchase is planned for Friday night at a motel on the east side. The buyer is a correctional officer. The vendor has a criminal record for drug offenses. I'll call later for more information. Then I hung up. I figured they would be interested in this. I would provide more information over the phone later in the week. I also found out the phone number of the photographer, Dennis Thompson. I dialed his number and got an answering machine. The message I left read, I have information that there will be a drug bust operation organized by the Tri-County Task Force at a motel on the east side on Friday night. If you're interested, I'll call you back at 4 o'clock today for more details. Later, at the appointed time, I called him back from our home phone and disguised my voice again. I left a message about the drug bust Friday night, I said. Yes, I got your message. I contacted Tri-County and they said they didn't have anything ready. I'll give them more information later. The buyer is an employee of the state correctional prison. I hear he sells drugs inside the prison to inmates. If the case pans out, you can get some pictures and a story. And what's your name? Nice try, but I prefer to remain anonymous. Okay. If the information checks out, I might be interested. Nah. I'll call you back at the end of the week and give you details as they become available. I'll be calling this number. I then hung up. As usual, I showed up for work. During lunch, Trev and I met and exchanged notes. I told him about Saturday night and how I thought Connie was there to set Donna up on their date Friday night. I also gave Trev $3,000 in cash. I also told him about my calls to the hotline and the photographer. He laughed when I told him about Dennis Thompson. Those guys are like pit bulls. You get them on a story and they won't let up. That's the thing. I want as much light to fall on Donna and friends as possible. I'm sure the correctional officer story will generate interest. Oh yeah, nothing like corruption and drugs for a good story. I nodded. Maybe I can do something about that too before Friday. Is $3,000 enough to get what we need? More than enough. I also talked to Tony last night. He told me not to worry about him. He won't lose sleep over what happens to Curtis and James. He also told me he knows where Curtis hangs out after work a couple days a week. It's the Airport Tavern near the UPS warehouse. He said he drives by there almost every day, and if he sees Curtis's car parked in the lot, he stops by to see what he's up to. Okay, thanks for everything, Trev. Tuesday was Donna's day off. I left about the time she got out of bed and told her I was going to the university to register. Instead, I drove to a suburb of Detroit, where I knew there were a couple stores. I bought a couple packs of cigarette paper and a roach clip. I got home in time to pick up Sam from preschool and have dinner before I left for work. During my shift, Trev and I had a brief conversation. He said he was all set for Friday's union meeting. The foreman knew I would be attending. I asked him what the status was on getting what we needed. He said he would have most of it by Wednesday night, and it was no problem. Wednesday, I killed the day to finish up some yard work. I also used that day to search for divorce attorneys. I called several to inquire about availability and fees without giving my name. I also went down to the 7-Eleven payphone and called the Tri-County hotline again. When the operator answered, I said, my code name is Black and Tan, and I called on Monday about a purchase that will take place Friday night. The supplier's name is Curtis Halleck. He has a record. He drives a silver Lincoln Town car. The transaction will take place between 11 and 12 p.m. I'll call you back Friday before 10 p.m. and give you the name of the motel, the room number, and the name of the correctional officer who will be the buyer. I then abruptly hung up. Later, before Donna got home from work, I called the photographer, Dennis Townsend, again. I repeated what I'd said on the hotline. "Are you interested?" I asked. "Definitely." I talked to Lieutenant Mason, who runs the Tri-County Task Force. Your tip and what you told me has been forwarded to the state police. They're very interested. It seems they were investigating a drug case at Ionia Prison. It looks like your buyer may be a major source of information on how they get there. Okay, how long will it take you to get to the neighborhood east of US 123, south of the university? No more than 20 minutes, but the task force will probably take 30 to 45 minutes to mobilize. I told him I would call him 5 minutes before I called the Tri-County Task Force. He said he'd be ready, and I hung up. Trev came into work whistling with a smile on his face. I looked at him and said, "Something must have made you happy today." He laughed and said, "Oh yes, I'll tell you about it at lunch." As we sat down to eat, he said, "Guess what? Troy managed to pick Curtis up at the airport tavern last night. Curtis had too much to drink and was talking about his latest asshole." Trev stopped and felt awkward for a moment. "I'm sorry, Ken. I guess I wasn't thinking." I just shrugged. "Don't worry about it, Trev. I admit it still hurts, but I'll be fine." Anyway, Troy told him that he certainly admired his taste in white women. Curtis laughed and said that if he wanted to, he could stop by room 120 at the Red Roof Inn on Friday night and maybe give it a try. What's more, maybe he'll leave the window open and be able to watch what's going on. Curtis seems to know someone who works at the inn, and whenever he wants a room, he always gets the same one. It's the last room on the first floor. Troy thinks Curtis sometimes uses it to trade and also to meet girls. Troy told him he'd like to, but he'd be out of town Friday night. And actually, I told Troy that it would be nice if that's what he did. I didn't tell him anything else, but he got the point. I thought for a moment. Knowing the room number would certainly make things easier. I've surveyed the hotel, and getting in and out of that part of the parking lot will be fairly easy. There's plenty of cover. I paused and looked around. "What about stuff?" I whispered. "I've got almost everything. We'll move them to your pickup after work." "Good. I hope you were careful in handling them. I don't want your fingerprints on these things." I was careful. Still in the original packaging from the suppliers, and I wiped everything down after I got it. I nodded. I really want to get this over with. The tension at home is starting to build. It's only 2 more days. But have you thought about what comes after that? You'd better be ready for questions, from the police, from family, and from friends. Your story needs to be airtight. I nodded. I hadn't thought about the fact that I'd have to find a divorce lawyer. But you're right. I'll think about it between now and Friday. I spent part of Thursday morning taking notes on possible scenarios and how they should play out. What my reaction should be in each case. I wanted to act unexpectedly, but not be taken by surprise. In the evening after work, I discussed them with Trev, listened to his suggestions, and included the ones I felt were appropriate for my personality and situation. I also made a list of everything I needed for Friday night and the sequence of things I needed to accomplish. The last few days at home have been routine, but stressful. I made no effort to kiss Donna goodbye or greet her as we usually did. If she cornered me, I didn't try to avoid her, but I didn't show any enthusiasm either. Donna didn't give me any signals that she wanted to make love at any time, and I didn't show any initiative either. Our conversations were brief and superficial. From time to time, I thought I noticed a puzzled expression on her face, as if she was trying to figure out what was wrong. Donna went to work every day, and Sam went to preschool. I would pick Sam up from school and usually cook dinner or get takeout for the 3 of us to eat before I left for work. Every night after work, I went straight home and didn't hit the bars. I never found any further evidence that Connie was anywhere near me, but figured the 2 of them were on the phone. Thursday night, before I was out the door, Donna mentioned in passing that she was meeting her friends Josie and Mary for dinner Friday night. I just nodded and left for work. Friday finally came, and I got up early and started getting ready as soon as Donna and Sam left. I went through a drawer of hospital stuff that Donna had collected over the last couple years. I put on a pair of surgical gloves from the box she had, and also set aside a pair of gloves for tonight. She had several bags with the hospital logo on them that she gave out to all of her staff. Donna used one of them every day to carry her work shoes and purse to work. I picked out an old used bag and cleaned out the trash she had left in it. Among the trash, I found some receipts from the hospital cafeteria and purposely left a couple of them at the bottom of the bag. I retrieved a bag of drugs from the basement where I had stashed them. I also put an envelope in the bag with $500 in hundreds, 50s, and 20s. After tightly rolling and folding the bag, I tucked it into my backpack and put it behind my seat in the pickup truck. As an added zest, I prepared a couple of small packets to put in the inside compartment at the bottom of Donna's purse, which I knew she never used. Then I transferred the sachets into a larger bag and stashed it in my briefcase. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the house. I scrubbed every surface that might have touched the bag. I dusted the furniture, swept the carpets, and mopped the floors. I collected the dust bag from the vacuum cleaner, the surgical gloves I wore, and the baggie. I bagged everything, took it all to the 7-Eleven store on the next block, and threw it in the trash. Then I changed my clothes, took a shower, and washed everything I was wearing. I couldn't be too careful. When the time came, I went and picked up Sam from daycare. I sat down and played with her and tried to relax a little. I couldn't shake the guilt I felt for what she was going through. I knew it would be hard for her to lose her mother. I hoped and prayed that I could fill the void in her life. I made it to dinner and Donna got home on time. When she retired to her bedroom to change, it only took me a minute to open her purse, open her briefcase, and transfer the bags to the zippered compartment. Dinner went without incident. Donna and Sam were still sitting at the table talking when I started out the door. I stopped for a moment to look at the two of them, knowing that this might be the last time I would see them together in any kind of happy, carefree environment. I resigned myself to the fact that one of us would likely end up in jail before this night was over. For a moment, I regretted that it was Donna who had dropped everything, and not me, and without another word, I turned and walked out the door. Trev and I arrived at work about 15 minutes early. I told him about my arrangements, and he thought for a moment and said, "You might want to think about one thing. At some point, someone is going to realize they've been set up, and will try to figure out exactly who." Yeah, I know. And sooner or later, Donna will start thinking about who had access to her purse. It'll probably come down to Connie or me. But I'm hoping that by the time it does, Sam and I will have moved to a new place to live, and the divorce and custody will be settled. If it comes down to her word against mine, who do you think they'll believe? As planned, we worked through lunch. Then Trev walked me to the parking lot. I carried my backpack into his car and we exchanged keys. As a parting gift, he handed me a Slim Jim from the foreman's office. It seemed like every week, several people locked themselves in their cars, so most foremen kept these handy tools in their offices. We shook hands, and I said with more confidence than I felt, "I'll see you at Gino's around 2." Trev only nodded, and I left. It only took me 20 minutes to get to the Best Western Hotel across the street from the hotel. I parked in a dark corner where field binoculars could make out the wing of the building between the trees that housed room 120. Two cars were parked at the end of the building, Curtis's town car and a blue Trans Am that I knew belonged to Connie. I looked at my watch. It was already 9:30. I thought to myself that they'd certainly wasted no time getting here from Black and Tan. I put on my surgical gloves, got my backpack out of the trunk, and put it on. As I crossed the street, the only cars on the road that I could see were at the intersection with the freeway. I hid behind a pine tree and watched the two cars and the rooms for a few minutes. There was a light from the window of room 120, but all the other rooms on that side were dark. Ducking down, I ran across the lot and lurked between the cars. I put my hand on the hood of the Trans Am and felt the heat coming off of it. They hadn't been here long. I tried the Trans Am's passenger door, but it was locked. I took off my backpack and opened it. I pulled out the Slim Jim and ran it across the window pane until I found the door latch, yanked hard, and the door unlocked. I pulled my hospital bag out of my backpack, quietly opened the car door, and stuffed it under the front passenger seat. I locked the door again and quietly closed it. I put on my backpack, and as I started to walk back across the parking lot, I stopped and looked at the lighted window of the motel room. I knew it was a bad idea, but something was pulling me toward the window. I crept down the sidewalk and approached the window. Muffled sounds were coming to me. I slowly stood up, and at that moment, an inch or two gap formed in the curtains. Whether it was unintentional or Curtis thought Troy was going to show up, I don't know. In the dim light and through the haze of smoke, I made out Donna and Curtis on the nearest bed 5 feet from the window. On the other bed were James and Connie. Stunned, I turned around, slowly lowered myself to the floor with my back against the wall, and covered my eyes with my hands. I was stunned. Nothing I had imagined could have prepared me for this. In a daze, I stood up and staggered across the parking lot, crossed the road, and walked over to Trev's car. I turned around and looked back at room 120. I cursed myself for looking out that window. I would never forget that scene every time I remembered the woman I once loved. If I could have destroyed that building and everyone in it at that moment, I would have. I took a couple deep breaths and remembered what I needed to do next. I turned away and walked towards the Best Western office and the payphone outside. I put some change down and dialed the photographer's phone number. When Dennis answered, I said, "The drug buy is taking place in room 120 of the Red Roof Inn on Forest Road. The supplier is Curtis Halleck. He drives a silver Lincoln Town car. The buyer is James Martin. He's a correctional officer at Ionia State Prison. They hide out in a motel room with 2 prostitutes. One of the prostitutes drives a blue Trans Am." "I got it," Dennis said. "How long will it take you to get here?" I asked. "About 15 to 20 minutes. You have 5 minutes before I call the Tri-County Task Force." "Thank you, Lieutenant Mason is waiting for your call. I'm on my way out." Then he hung up. I stood there, immersed in my thoughts, and just stared at the road. Finally, I checked my watch, picked up the phone, and dialed the Tri-County number. When they answered, I called myself by code word and repeated what I'd told Dennis, adding one detail. I told them that James Martin had a gun and Curtis Halleck had a knife. Then I hung up the phone. I walked back to the end of the station and went to my car. I took off my gloves and put them in my backpack. I drove to the back of the Best Western Hotel and threw the backpack and its contents into the dumpster. I then drove back to the edge of the lot where the hotel and room 120 stood. Standing next to the car, I had an excellent view of both sides of the building from about 150 feet away. This part of the parking lot was poorly lit, and I was wearing dark clothing, so I was fairly well concealed. Through field binoculars, I watched the entrance to the hotel and the side of the building where room 120 was located. About 15 minutes later, a car pulled up and parked outside the office. 2 men got out of it, and instead of entering the office, walked along the row of rooms and turned the corner toward the end of the building. One of the men stopped at the corner, and the other continued down to room 120. I saw him stop at the window. For several minutes he did not move from his seat, and I figured he was watching what was going on. He had something in his hand that I took to be a camera. He turned and walked on. They spent a few minutes hugging, then walked back to their car and waited. About 30 minutes later, 6 unmarked cars drove down the road and turned off their headlights as they turned into the parking lot. About a dozen men in some kind of dark windbreakers got out. You could make out the words "police" on their backs. I saw one officer walk into the office, and several others opened the trunks of their cars and pulled out some equipment. Two sheriff's cars drove silently down Forest Road and took up positions at each end of the block. The two men I had originally observed approached one of the officers and pointed to the end of the building. I decided it was probably Dennis Thompson. About 6 officers headed toward the end of the building, followed by the photographer. 2 other officers headed toward the back of the building, and 2 more took up positions at the entrance to the parking lot. The 6 officers rounded the corner of the building and approached a window. One of the officers peered through the window and pointed the others toward the door. 2 officers with pistols at the ready took up positions on either side of the door, and 2 officers who were carrying something between them took up positions in front of the door. The photographer seemed to have taken up a position directly behind them. Even from my seat, I could hear someone yell, "Police!" At the same time, the 2 officers in front of the door swung what must have been an iron battering ram at the door, which swung open with a loud crack. As the door swung open, I saw the flash of a photographer holding a camera above the heads of the officers. All 4 officers piled into the room, accompanied by yelling and screaming. I heard someone or something hit the wall, and then everything went quiet. I could see the camera flashes continuing from inside the room. The shouting changed to cursing and yelling, and I heard a faint cry. Several more officers quickly gathered around the room, and I saw 2 more police cars with blinkers enter the parking lot and stop in front of the room. Several female police officers got out of their cars and entered the room. Several more officers began to look around the town car and Trans Am with flashlights. After a couple more minutes, 2 officers pulled Curtis out of the room with his hands cuffed together. His head was down. They put him in the car and drove away. James was led out the same way, only he was walking on his own. He looked shocked and stunned. They put him in another car and drove him away. 2 more police cars and a pickup truck labeled K9 Unit pulled up. More officers entered the room. One of the officers came out with keys and opened the doors and trunks of the cars. Several officers began going through the contents of both cars. Finally, Donna and Connie were led out of the room in handcuffs, each accompanied by a female officer. They were allowed to dress, but it was obvious from their disheveled appearance that their clothes had just been thrown on them. I watched Donna carefully through my glasses as she stumbled across the threshold, supported by the officer. I could see her clearly. I had never seen such an expression of horror and helplessness on anyone's face as she had now. Tears and grimace streamed down her cheeks. She blinked often in the light, and I could see her chin and body trembling as she tried to hold back what I assumed were sobs. As much as I thought Donna and the others deserved it, for a minute I hated myself for doing this to her. Then I remembered the scene in the motel room and the way she'd treated Samantha and me, and the guilt dissipated. I watched as the 2 of them were shoved into the patrol car and watched through field binoculars as it slowly pulled out of the parking lot and down the road. Dazed with horror, I lowered the binoculars and watched in silence as the police strobe lights disappeared into the distance. I thought sadly about how uncertain my future had become. If you want a sequel to this story, give this video a like and write about it in the comments. The second part will be released 12 hours after this video is published.